The rain-soaked streets of Liverpool glistened under the dim glow of the street lamps. The city was eerily silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. It was in this unsettling stillness that a lone figure lay crumpled on the cobblestone, their body marred by savage claw marks and vicious bites. The once vibrant life had been drained from them, leaving only a haunting shell. The blaring sirens of the police cars shattered the silence, as flashing blue lights reflected off the rain-slicked pavement. Detective Inspector Emily Carter stepped out of her vehicle, her breath visible in the cold night air. She pulled the collar of her coat tighter around her neck and approached the gruesome scene. Uniformed officers were already on site, cordoning off the area and keeping curious onlookers at bay. Forensics teams moved methodically, their gloves glistening as they gathered evidence. Emily's sharp eyes took in every detail, from the deep gashes on the victim's body to the peculiar, almost otherworldly nature of the wounds. "Inspector," called a voice. It was Sergeant James Harris, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. "You'll want to see this." Emily followed James to the edge of the crime scene, where he pointed to a set of large, clawed footprints leading away from the body and disappearing into the darkness. The size and shape of the prints were like nothing Emily had ever seen before, far too large to belong to any known animal in the region. "Have we identified the victim?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. James shook his head. "Not yet. No ID on the body. We're running fingerprints now." Emily's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. The city had seen its share of strange occurrences, but this was something different, something far more sinister. She turned her gaze back to the footprints, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. As the night wore on, the sense of dread deepened. The unknown creature that had left those marks was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Emily knew that this was just the beginning, and whatever horror had befallen the victim would not be the last. The hunt for the creature had begun, and with it, a nightmare that would plunge Liverpool into terror. Sarah and Mark strolled down the empty streets of Liverpool, their laughter and conversation a welcome reprieve from the day's stresses. The night was cool, and the city seemed to be in a rare moment of tranquility. As they approached a narrow alleyway lined with overgrown bushes, an eerie stillness settled over the area. "Could you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her grip tightening around Mark's arm. A strange, low growl emanated from the bushes, sending a shiver down their spines. They stopped in their tracks, straining to hear the unnerving sound again. Without warning, a fierce, guttural roar pierced the night, causing both of them to freeze in terror. From the shadows, a dark, hulking figure burst forth, its claws gleaming in the dim light. The creature moved with astonishing speed, its eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. Screams of sheer panic echoed through the streets as Sarah and Mark tried to flee. But it was too late. The creature's claws tore through the air, and the couple's cries were abruptly silenced. Blood splattered on the cobblestone, mingling with the rain as the monstrous figure vanished into the darkness once more. The following morning, the sun's first light revealed a grim scene. Detective Inspector Emily Carter and Sergeant James Harris stood at the edge of the blood-soaked alleyway, the horror of the previous night etched on their faces. The bodies of Sarah and Mark lay sprawled on the ground, bearing the same savage claw marks and bites as the previous victim. Emily's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene, her mind racing with questions and dread. "We have a pattern, James," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "This creature, whatever it is not stopping. We need to find it before more lives are lost." James nodded, his expression grim. "We have to find a way to track it before it strikes again." The investigators watched as the forensics team worked diligently, collecting evidence and documenting the scene. The sense of dread deepened, knowing that the unknown creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows of Liverpool. As the day wore on, the city's fear grew, and whispers of the midnight horror spread like wildfire. Emily knew that the clock was ticking, and each passing moment brought them closer to another encounter with the monstrous terror. Detective James Harris awoke in his small, cluttered apartment to the sound of his alarm clock blaring. Groaning, he reached out and silenced it, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on his mind, but he tried to shake off the unease as he trudged to the kitchen to make his morning coffee. As he stood by the counter, savoring the first sip of the dark, steaming brew, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw Emily Carter's name flashing. His heart skipped a beat, and he quickly answered. "Emily, what's up?" he asked, his voice still husky from sleep. "James, turn on the news." Now Emily's tone was urgent, and James could hear the tension in her voice. James grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The screen flickered to life, revealing the grim face of a news anchor. The headline scrolling across the bottom sent a chill down his spine. "Another victim found in Liverpool, gripped by fear of unknown creature." The news anchor's voice was grave as she reported. "Authorities have discovered another victim in the heart of Liverpool, bearing the same savage wounds as the previous attacks. The city is now in a state of panic as residents fear the unknown creature that prowls the streets." James watched in stunned silence as a witness appeared on the screen, describing the terrifying sight they had encountered the night before. It was massive, like the size of a lion, the witness said, their voice trembling. It had long claws and black skin. "I've never seen anything like it." The camera cut back to the news anchor, who continued, "Police are urging residents to stay indoors after dark and to report any unusual sightings immediately." Emily's voice broke through James's thoughts. "James, did you hear that? We need to talk to this witness. Meet me at the station." "I'm on my way," James replied, grabbing his coat and keys. He left his apartment with a sense of urgency, his mind racing with questions and dread. As he made his way to the police station, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. The creature's attacks were becoming more frequent, and the city's fear was palpable. They needed to find answers, and fast. At the station, Emily was already waiting, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "We need to get to the bottom of this, James," she said, as they prepared to interview the witness. "We have to understand what we're dealing with." Together they delved into the growing mystery, determined to uncover the truth behind the deadly creature that haunted Liverpool's streets. It was almost midnight. The dimly lit police station was silent, save for the occasional rustle of papers and the hum of the overhead lights. Detective Inspector Emily Carter and Sergeant James Harris sat hunched over a cluttered desk, surrounded by evidence, photos, and the witness statement. Their faces bore the marks of exhaustion, but they pressed on, determined to piece together the puzzle of the deadly creature terrorizing Liverpool. Emily flipped through the stack of photos for the umpteenth time, her eyes scanning every detail for a clue they might have missed. James tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought. The witness's description of the creature, its size, black skin and long claws played over and over in his mind. Suddenly, James's eyes widened as a realization struck him. He grabbed the map of Liverpool from the edge of the desk and spread it out in front of them. "Emily, look at this," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. Emily leaned in, watching as James marked the locations of the victims on the map. One by one, he connected the dots, forming a rough circle. All the victims were found within a 3-mile radius of the park, James said, pointing to the central point on the map. Emily's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. "The park. It's like the creature's hunting ground," she murmured, a sense of dread settling over her. Before they could delve deeper into their discovery, another policeman burst into the office, his face pale and eyes wide with alarm. "Detectives, we just received a phone call about a scary creature spotted in the park. It's causing a commotion." James and Emily exchanged a tense glance. "Let's go," Emily said, grabbing her coat and motioning for James to follow. They hurried out of the station, their minds racing with the implications of the latest sighting. As they sped through the dark streets of Liverpool, the city's fear seemed to hang heavy in the air. The park loomed ahead, a shadowy expanse shrouded in mystery. Emily and James knew that whatever awaited them there, they had to confront it head-on. The hunt for the creature had taken a new, urgent turn, and the stakes had never been higher. The police car screeched to a halt at the edge of the park, its blue lights casting an eerie glow on the rain-soaked trees. Detectives Emily Carter and James Harris stepped out into the cold. Dark night, their breath visible in the chill air. The rain began to fall in heavy droplets, making the ground slick and muddy. With their torches in hand, they ventured into the park, the beams of light cutting through the darkness. The only sounds were the soft patter of rain and the occasional rustle of leaves. Emily and James moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the creature. Suddenly, Emily stopped and pointed at the ground. "James, look," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. James shone his torch where Emily was pointing and saw them large, clawed footprints embedded in the wet, muddy path. The prints were unlike anything they had seen before, both terrifying and intriguing. They followed the trail, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The footprints led them deeper into the park, where the trees grew denser and the shadows darker. They reached a thicket of bushes, and as they pushed through the foliage, they stumbled upon a grisly scene. Another victim lay sprawled on the ground, their body bearing the now familiar claw marks and bites. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight, but before she could react further, a faint moaning sound reached her ears. The victim was alive. "James, he's still breathing," Emily exclaimed, kneeling beside the injured person. She quickly assessed the wounds, which were severe but not immediately fatal. James grabbed his radio and called for backup and an ambulance. "We need medical assistance at the park immediately. We found another victim, and he's still alive." As they waited for help to arrive, Emily and James did their best to comfort the injured person, who was slipping in and out of consciousness. The rain continued to fall, drenching them all and adding to the sense of urgency. The hospital room was silent, save for the soft beeping of the machines. The victim lay motionless on the bed, his breaths growing shallower by the minute. Detectives Emily and James stood by his side, hoping for any final words that might shed light on the identity of the creature. With a raspy breath, the victim managed to whisper, "It was a woman. Blonde hair. A woman." He paused, gathering his strength for one last revelation. "Claire Johnson," he murmured before slipping into unconsciousness. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, the victim succumbed to his injuries, leaving Emily and James with more questions than answers. The detectives hurried back to the station, the name Claire Johnson echoing in their minds. At the station, they immediately ran a search through the database, finding several individuals with the name Claire Johnson. They decided to start with the one who lived closest to the park where the latest attack had occurred. Arriving at the address, they knocked on the door, and a blonde-haired woman answered. "Claire Johnson?" Emily asked, her tone professional. "Yes, that's me," the woman replied. Her eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "We're investigating an incident that occurred last night. Do you recognize this person?" James showed her a photo of the victim. The woman's expression remained blank. "No, I don't know him. I was home all night, sleeping." Emily and James exchanged a glance, sensing no immediate deceit. "Thank you for your time," Emily said, handing her a card. "If you remember anything, please contact us." They proceeded to the next addresses, interviewing several other Claire Johnsons, but each encounter led to the same dead end. None of them knew the victim, and none had any relevant information. Back at the station, frustration began to set in. The name Claire Johnson seemed like a vital clue, yet it had led them nowhere. Emily stared at the map, her mind racing to find a connection they might have missed. James sat nearby, sifting through the witness statements and evidence. "There's something we're not seeing," Emily muttered, her eyes narrowing in determination. The city was gripped by fear, and they couldn't afford to let the trail go cold. Emily and James pored over old newspapers and archival information, searching for any clues that might link the recent attacks to the past. Hours turned into days, and finally their persistence paid off. Buried in the archives, they found a case from 30 years earlier, a series of attacks eerily similar to the ones they were investigating. The investigation had been closed without resolution when the attacks abruptly stopped. One name stood out among the old files: Paul Johnson. He had been a person of interest, mentioned several times in the investigation, but there had never been enough evidence to charge him. Intrigued, Emily and James decided to dig deeper. When they cross-referenced the name with their current records, a chilling realization struck them. Paul Johnson had lived at the same address as Claire Johnson, the blonde woman they had interviewed earlier. With a sense of urgency, they headed back to Claire's house. Claire opened the door, her expression wary but polite. "Detectives, Is there something else you need?" she asked, stepping aside to let them in. "We need to ask you about Paul Johnson," James said, his voice steady. "Do you know him?" Claire's face paled slightly. "He was my father, but he passed away just after I was born. 30 years ago," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "My mother disappeared around the same time, and there's been no trace of her since. My grandmother raised me, but she passed away last year." Emily and James exchanged a glance, sensing the weight of Claire's troubled past. "We're sorry to bring this up, but we need to understand if there's any connection to the recent events," Emily said gently. Claire sighed, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and frustration. "I just want to move on from my difficult past," she said. "I've tried to put all of it behind me." The detectives thanked Claire for her time and left her house, their minds racing with questions. They decided to watch the house for a while, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything unusual. Parking their car in a dark, inconspicuous spot, they settled in for a long night of surveillance. As the hours ticked by, the rain continued to fall, and the city's shadows grew deeper. Emily and James knew they were on the verge of uncovering something significant, but the elusive creature still remained just out of reach. The detectives sat in their car, parked inconspicuously in the shadows. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city was shrouded in a damp, eerie silence. James was dozing in the passenger seat when Emily suddenly nudged him awake. "James, wake up. Claire's leaving the house," she whispered urgently. James rubbed his eyes and looked out the window. Claire was indeed leaving, heading toward a nearby shop. They watched as she walked away, noting that she hadn't locked the door behind her. "This might be our chance," James said, his voice hushed but determined. "I'll go in and take a quick look. You stay here and warn me if she comes back." Emily nodded, her eyes sharp and focused. "Be careful, James. We don't have a warrant." James slipped out of the car and quietly approached the house. He eased the door open, slipping inside with his torch in hand. The darkness enveloped him, and he moved cautiously, making sure not to disturb anything that might give away his presence. He walked from room to room, the torchlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As he searched, something caught his eye, a wardrobe standing in an odd position. It seemed out of place, as if it were hiding something. James moved the wardrobe slightly and discovered a hidden door behind it. His heart raced as he opened the door and stepped into a secret room. The space was cluttered with garbage and old, forgotten items. As he scanned the room, his phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Claire is coming back," the message read. James's pulse quickened. He glanced around the secret room one last time and spotted a notebook lying amidst the clutter. He grabbed it and quickly moved back, carefully closing the hidden door behind him. Just as he reached the front window, he saw Claire walking up the path. He had no time to escape unnoticed. With no other options, he slipped back into the secret room, hiding among the shadows. Claire entered the house and went straight upstairs, oblivious to James's presence. The moment she was out of sight, James quietly left his hiding place and slipped out the front door. He made his way back to the car, his heart still pounding. "Let's go," he whispered to Emily as he slid into the driver's seat. They drove away, the notebook clutched tightly in his hand. As they left the scene, They couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering a crucial piece of the puzzle. Emily and James sat in the dimly lit office, the notebook open before them. As they read through the pages, a chilling tale of horror unfolded. 30 years ago, it had been Paul Johnson Clare's father who had committed the gruesome murders. His writings revealed a terrifying struggle with an uncontrollable transformation. "I don't know how it happens," Paul had written, "but at night I become a beast, a creature with black skin and long claws. I lose all control, and the hunger to hunt overtakes me. I am devastated by what I have done. I even killed Claire's mother and hid her body, unable to live with the guilt. I fear that Claire may inherit this curse, and I cannot bear the thought. I will end my own life to stop this madness." The detectives were in shock. Paul's confession explained the monstrous attacks and the possibility that Claire could be experiencing the same. Transformation sent a shiver down their spines. They needed to talk to her immediately. "We need to bring Claire to the station," Emily said, her voice resolute. "We have to understand if she's affected by this curse." They quickly sent a patrol to Claire's house to escort her to the station. Moments later, a frantic warning came through the radio. "We've been attacked. 2 officers down." A creature, black as night, was seen fleeing towards the park, requesting immediate backup. Emily and James exchanged a grim look. The beast was on the move again. "We need to get to the park now," James said urgently. They gathered their gear and raced out of the station, joining the other officers heading to the scene. As they arrived at the park, the area was in chaos. Panicked residents had reported sightings of the creature, and the police were working to secure the perimeter. Emily and James joined the search, their hearts pounding with both fear and determination. The hunt for the beast had taken a new and dangerous turn, and the detectives knew that every second counted. They had to find Claire, understand the full extent of the horrifying legacy her father had left behind, and stop the creature before it could strike again. The park was a maze of shadows and tension as the police, along with Emily and James, searched for any sign of the beast or Claire. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the promise of another storm. The detectives moved cautiously to the place where they had found the last victim, their torches cutting through the darkness. Suddenly a terrifying roar shattered the silence. A monstrous beast, its black skin glistening in the dim light, leaped out of the bushes and attacked James, knocking him to the ground. The creature was as big as a bear, with long claws and razor-sharp teeth. It stood on 2 legs, exuding an aura of pure menace. Emily's instincts kicked in. She fired 2 bullets at the beast, hitting it in the side. The creature staggered, but didn't fall, instead turning its attention to Emily with a snarl. Desperation and determination fueled her next shot. She aimed carefully and fired again, and the beast collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. Emily rushed to James, who was already getting to his feet. "I'm fine," he assured her, brushing off the dirt and grime. Emily quickly called for backup, then cautiously approached the fallen beast. As she neared, the creature began to change, its monstrous form shrinking and morphing. Before their eyes, the terrifying beast transformed into a human, and it was Claire. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with pain and sorrow. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, her voice weak. "I couldn't stop it. I tried, but the beast took over. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to explain. And then, with a final breath, she passed away. Later, in the office, Emily and James sat in stunned silence, trying to process the horror they had witnessed. The notebook's revelations and the night's events weighed heavily on them. Their contemplation was interrupted by another police officer entering the room. "Detectives, there's something you need to know," he said, his expression serious. "We're exhausted." "Can it wait?" Emily asked, rubbing her temples. The officer shook his head. "This is important. Claire had an 8-year-old daughter who was put up for adoption. The daughter just disappeared from the adoption center." Emily and James exchanged a look of shock and dread. The implications of this news were staggering.